welcome everybody to the People's Classroom. I'm Gianni Notaro. Thank you so much for joining us. Got an excellent presentation for you that I think you're going to take something away from for tonight. Again, this looks like standing room only, so thanks you very much for awesome turnout. Really appreciate the other side, obviously, for hosting me, for the PSL for showing up as well. But yeah, pretty excited about tonight. Like I said, I think you're going to find some stuff that maybe you're not super familiar with when it comes to the Obama presidency and his administration. So, agenda for the day, what we're going to do is go through like the beginnings of the Obama presidency and definitely take a deep dive into the ACA, Obamacare, and our health insurance, just kind of the world that we live in when it comes to health insurance in general. Then we'll take a break and we'll come back and kind of finish up with some other major events that took place during the Obama administration's time period as well. So got a lot to cover. And just a few quick reminders if you want to stay connected and stay in touch. So my next class here at the other side is going to be Tuesday, September 23rd. And I think I'm going to start going in chronological order. We're going to go all the way back to the roots of the American Revolution and the founding of this country, and really focus on a working class perspective that is not like the milquetoast survey level, founding fathers are the greatest people in the history of the world sort of approach when it comes to the American Revolution. So I think people will take quite a bit away from that as well. So that'll be Tuesday, September 23rd, again, right here at the other side. And then, I'm so glad that they're here as well, at the Copper Easel and Super Official out in Rome. They were kind enough to meet with me and invite me to give a presentation there as well. So on Tuesday, September 16th, out at the Copper Easel, I will give another presentation there. We're still trying to figure out exactly which topic to cover, but we were thinking either labor history or LGBTQ rights with some links to today. Might be something that a lot of people would turn out for. So that's kind of what we're planning on for that. So we're going to take a little bit of a break after tonight because school's starting and I need to focus on my job. So we're going to focus back on that for a little bit, but we'll be back in a couple weeks and just kind of keep the momentum going of people showing up to hear the working class perspective when it comes to history and current events, which is what we're all about. So let's start with this. This is right in your packet. Hopefully, I actually wasn't expecting that big of a turnout tonight, so I only made 30 copies instead of the usual 40 that I made. So I don't know if everybody actually has a paper copy, but you can at least look up here on the screen and try to follow along as best you can. But we're going to start with this prompt. So I'm going to show you a quote from Malcolm X. I want you to tell me what is the main argument that Malcolm X is presenting, and then how do you think it possibly relates to what we're going to talk about today? And then I'm going to ask you as the very last question at the end, was Malcolm X correct based on everything that I presented today? So let's start with this. If you can't read it, or if you don't have the paper copy in front of you, this is a Malcolm X quote. So he says, "A fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to. But the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling and take him for a friend." Okay? So if you can take a second, summarize what argument Malcolm X is making, and then tell me how might it relate to what we're going to cover today. So I'll give you like a minute, think it over. If you want to discuss it with somebody else, go for it. And then we'll come back together in a little bit. All right, so we'll start with this. All right, anyone be so brave enough to offer up what just simple argument do you think Malcolm X is making here? Yeah, good.
It's similar to what he said about the difference between a Southern bigot and a Northern liberal, that he'd rather deal with a Southern bigot because he knew where he was coming.
Yeah, like with a KKK member, you know exactly where you stand, okay? With like a white liberal, especially a moderate in the North, you're like, I don't really know exactly, but they still might be out to get me in another way, shape, or form. That's a pretty good summation. How do you think it relates to what we're going to talk about today? And that's a little bit tougher, but if anybody wants to try to make the connection, I would really appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah, go for it.
I'm gonna go out on a whim and say that Obama looks friend-shaped, but maybe isn't as good as we think he is.
Nailed it. That's pretty much it. Yep. This cartoon pretty much sums up. So what I want you to do by the end of my presentation is Malcolm X correct? Is somebody like President Obama? Are they more dangerous in some ways than somebody that's already super dangerous, as somebody like President Trump? Somebody on that sort of wavelength. So that's the question that I want you to keep in mind throughout the course of this. Was Malcolm X correct? Is somebody like President Obama in some ways more dangerous than somebody like President Trump? So keep that question at the forefront, because basically, if I can summarize it as simple as I can, does everyone remember the tan suit controversy when it came to President Obama? There are some people that legitimately believe this was the worst thing that President Obama did during his time period. If you think that's like the only bad thing that happened during the Obama presidency, then I want you to pay special attention to what I'm going to cover today, because the issues during the Obama presidency go a little bit deeper than a guy wearing a tan suit. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's start with the election of 2008. Does everybody remember Shepard Fairey and these famous posters? Hope, change, progress. Were these posters super effective? What did especially young people think when it came to candidate Obama? When he was first running for president, he was in that primary against Hillary Clinton in 2007 and then in 2008. What did a lot of young people think in particular? He's going to make a difference. And I'll never forget this speech, because I was a huge Obama supporter way back then in 2008. And I'll never forget this speech that he gave, where he said, "Change will not come if we wait for some other person or for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek." That got me so hyped up. I was like, oh my God, this is the next FDR. Like, here we go. This is exactly what we need. We're going through the Great Recession, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. President George W. Bush was an absolute debacle. This is it. We're finally going to have the course correction that we had, like we had at the Great Depression time period. So that's what we thought. But yeah, no, he did not. And I had no idea as a dumb 20-year-old. I was like, oh yeah, this sounds fantastic. This guy's so original. But yeah, that's what everybody thought. Like, Obama was going to be the new FDR. We were going to get like a new version of the New Deal. You're going to have a true working class legislative platform that is going to address material needs for the working class inside of this country. And I thought that full stop. Do you remember who Obama, obviously he eventually defeated Hillary Clinton in the Democratic primary. Who did he defeat in the 2008 election? Yeah, John McCain. Okay, so the senator from Arizona. And this was an absolute landslide. Okay, so Obama dominated in this election. He even won Florida, which a Democrat that doesn't even have a prayer of, in today's world. But he won states out west. He won the Rust Belt, which is also very tough for Democrats to win. Huge margins in just the popular vote as well. And then I don't know if you remember the big celebration at Grant Park in Chicago with Obama and his entire family. What did people feel like when they saw this picture? What was the hope here? What did they think was going to happen? Good stuff, like massive change. But the other thing that people need to keep in mind, what also happened in Congress with those elections in the House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate in the 2008 election? Do you remember that? The Democrats had massive majorities after the 2008 election with the House of Representatives, and they even had 60 seats in the Senate, which is filibuster-proof, which is a super majority. So really what it meant, if Obama wanted to pass something, would he have a pretty good odds of passing whatever he wanted to pass? Absolutely. Okay, so it wasn't just him getting elected. This was a landslide for Democrats across the entire country, and people were very hopeful. And you can look at Obama's approval rating at the start of his presidency. That's what people thought. You never see that. Even right out of the gates, nearly a 70% approval rating for President Obama, because people were so hopeful that change was actually going to be here. However, what you end up seeing almost initially, like right out of the gates with the Obama presidency, and I know I've shown you this multiple times, what does Obama ultimately end up becoming? Another what? Another Reagan, but this one more of an eloquent Reagan, very well-spoken Ronald Reagan. So that's what we ultimately end up seeing. So if you think back, think a lot today about how far 2 years Barack Obama had a 59 seats and 78-seat House majority. He could have done anything. He could have literally changed the world, but he's now sharing his favorite Spotify playlist while his former staff tried to stop people from unionizing. So always keep that in mind. Like, they had the ability to change things. They didn't do that. Because right out of the gates, one of the first things that the Obama administration did They extended the Bush tax cuts, which were geared towards giving the wealthy massive tax breaks and then believing in trickle-down economics for everyone else. So that was one of the very first things that President Obama did. He had every opportunity to let those tax cuts lapse and actually pass new tax cuts for the working class. Like, again, going back to like something that FDR did, that's not what happened at all. Later on in his presidency, he ended up raising taxes on the rich by 2 percentage points, and everyone freaked out and thought that he was like taking over the country or something. But that's all he really did. So very, very minor differences when you look at just basic tax policy. Very different from something that like FDR did. If you go back in time, if you look closely at this graph, the red line shows the highest wage earners in the country. During FDR's time period, the 30s and the 40s, there was a 90 to 95% like tax rate on the ultra rich that dropped significantly throughout the decades, and then it didn't change at any point from Reagan all the way through to today. So you've seen that kind of continuation of trickle-down economics. Obama's no different. And then the other thing that was raging early on in the Obama presidency, does everybody remember the Occupy Wall Street movement? So this is a massive sit-in, basically, of working class people that were destroyed by the Great Recession, going down to Wall Street and demanding that obviously the banks be held accountable for what happened and for somebody to do something about all this. Remember the massive bailout that we talked about a couple of weeks ago as well, where the banks got bailed out, people that lost their homes, no government bailout whatsoever. So this is what the Occupy Wall Street movement was really designed to try to tackle, is put people before profits and push the Obama administration to follow through on some of its campaign promises in particular. Instead, do you know how Obama ultimately responded to the Occupy Wall Street protest? Do you know what happened here very early on in his presidency? It's as obvious as you think. He squashed it, okay? And you started to see this, cops being sent out, and Obama making a deal with Michael Bloomberg, who was the mayor of New York City during the time period. They made a deal to just annihilate these protests. Get those camps, round them up, get them out of there. Okay, so they worked hand in hand with the New York City police to make sure that this whole movement just fell apart. And ultimately, the Occupy Wall Street movement, it started with this big bang, and everybody was very excited about it. It got crushed by the end, and Obama definitely sold out those Occupy Wall Street protesters in particular. And I'll never forget this. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this former professor at Utica College, which is now obviously Utica University. But the first time that I started to realize, oh, maybe I was kind of duped a little bit by the Obama presidency, was this story when I was in graduate school. I had a professor, his name was Paul Young. And you take upper level graduate classes when I was getting my master's degree in particular. He was from Chicago, and he was a member of the Black Panther Party, had just a great working class perspective of history in general. And this was right as the Obama administration was just getting off the ground. And he introduced us to a book that went through some of the basics of the beginnings of Obama as a politician. And one of the first things that he did, I don't know if anybody remembers this, in Chicago, he tried to run against Bobby Rush, who was one of the key members of the Black Panther Party, who was a longtime member of the House of Representatives. Obama tried to take him on, and people were kind of nervous about Obama just in general. So Obama got crushed by Bobby Rush, so that didn't end up working out. But Obama continued on with his candidacy and thought maybe he could run again and then try to run for Senate. People were nervous though because they thought Obama was going to be super radical. So all the big donors inside of Chicago, they decided to invite Barack Obama in, have a sit-down dinner with him, and just kind of see what is this guy all about. Should we give him money, or is he somebody that's going to be a little bit too radical for us and kind of put us in our place ultimately? Do you know what those massive donors found out by the end of their meeting with candidate Obama at the time? He was on their side. They're like, oh, actually, this guy we can totally control. There's not really a big risk here with him. We can back him. He's not really going to change things all that much. That was mind-blowing to me because that was never the way that Obama was portrayed, at least early on. So those big donors knew, this guy, he's really good at talking, but he's not going to actually change things when it comes to policy. We can back him, we can give him a lot of money, we can control him. And then these numbers started to come out about Obama's presidential campaign in 2008. If you look at these statistics that I have, who funded massive portions of Obama's presidential campaign in 2008? What's the biggest one that you probably noticed up there? Goldman Sachs. Okay, one of the biggest banks on the planet. They bankrolled the Obama candidacy, which again, I didn't know anything about this when I was, really excited about him. And he continued a lot of the bank bailout stuff that George W. Bush had, kind of started to begin with. He continued all those same policies. He was a big supporter of NAFTA and free trade agreements, which just continued the outsourcing of jobs ultimately and just destroying the manufacturing base inside of the United States. So he's a big proponent of those two programs in particular. And that's why you notice early on what started to happen to Obama's approval rating, obviously. Started to drop. Okay, it's because at least some segment of the population was starting to realize, oh, he's not really going to follow through on a lot of his campaign promises. And then we get to this, and this is the biggest thing that I want to talk about today, and I'm assuming this is the reason why most people are here. We have to talk about the Affordable Care Act that was ultimately passed. So the biggest issue, and this was what candidate Obama campaigned on in 2007 in order to separate himself from Hillary Clinton, really energize the younger people inside of the Democratic Party. He ran on, I'm going to pass a universal health care program, which is something that Americans, and especially, everyone, has been desperate for a very long time inside of the country. So you can read some of Obama's quotes up here, but I will sign a universal health care bill into law by the end of my first term as president. So that's pretty clear, universal health care, no ifs, ands, or buts, no wiggle room. And then here is Michelle Obama in 2007, which I think is a very interesting quote when you actually realize what ultimately ended up happening here. So she says, the truth is, in order to get things like universal health care and a revamped education system, then someone is going to have to give up a piece of their pie so that someone else can have more, okay? So were they talking a good game, things that working class people wanted to hear? No doubt. But then their follow through on policy is definitely lacking. Because what did this push for universal health care eventually morph into in 2010? What did we get? The Affordable Care Act, okay? Now I'll kind of walk you through some of the basics. I don't want to completely trash the ACA. There are some good pieces to it. I will get to the negatives in a lot more detail in a second. But if you go back to that time period, because there are pieces of this legislation, obviously, that are still with us today. Do you remember any of the positives from Obamacare? There was a couple good things that did come out of it. So like I said, I don't want to just completely trash it. But yeah,
Stay on your parents' health insurance to 26.
definitely. You could stay on your parents' health plan until 26, so that helped out a lot of families. Yeah. Free birth control, which was very nice. Yeah.
Covered pre-existing condition.
Very good. That was a huge one. Before, health insurance companies, if you had a pre-existing condition, they could deny your claim just straight up. If you look closely at this, what qualified as a pre-existing condition that, I don't know, is kind of nuts? Acne. If you have acne, they could deny you. Anxiety, which I think everybody has at this point. So they could deny you for basically any reason. So that's one of the good pieces of the ACA. It made it so it was illegal for insurance companies to deny you when it came to some of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, look at these things. They're crazy. So, I mean, tonsillitis is up there. Just simple things like that. So those are some of the positives to the ACA. So it's important to keep that stuff in mind. However, what did the ACA and Obamacare essentially force many Americans, though, to have to do? So this is kind of transitioning to more of what I view as the negatives to this plan instead. What did it force? To get insurance from who? Yes. Do you recognize the names of some of these massive health insurance corporations? You obviously see Excellus, which we are well versed with here in this area, but then there's also United Healthcare, Anthem, Aetna, Humana. All these names, when you really look at them, are fairly dystopian when you really start to think about it, but regardless. This is the key thing that I want to focus on. Let's go with United Healthcare, for instance. When Obamacare was passed, take a look at the total revenue from 2007 to 2023 when it comes to United Healthcare. When do you start to see massive profits, just windfalls for United Healthcare? Almost immediately. 2010 is when Obamacare was passed. You start to see just tons of money get poured into these massive private insurance corporations, where today United Healthcare is the biggest healthcare corporation on the planet. They pull in almost $400 billion a year. Okay, and those numbers are way higher than what they were prior to Obamacare. So that's a huge change. Now, this is something that is not super well known. Where did Obama get the idea for the Affordable Care Act from? Do you know which group he actually pulled this from? Which is like a piece of missing history that I wish more people would actually focus on. But yeah, you want to give it a shot?
I think it was Bush, right?
You're close. Yes, very good. So if you guys remember Mitt Romney, back when he was the governor of Massachusetts, he passed within his state a version of what became the Affordable Care Act, ultimately. But the actual group, I don't know if people are familiar with this group or not, but they've been a big player in U.S. politics for decades. He got it from the Heritage Foundation. Okay, the Heritage Foundation is a right-wing think tank, and they were the ones that gave Romney the idea in Massachusetts to begin with. They were the ones that pushed for the massive tax cuts for the rich during Reagan's presidency early on. They were the ones that rolled back like welfare protections, all these big like right-wing ideas. They were the ones that pushed this stuff, and this is where Obama ultimately got his ideas from, was from that group in particular. So always keep that in mind. That was actually the foundation of the Affordable Care Act. It was a right-wing policy that ultimately got passed by somebody that a lot of people viewed as more center or left-wing. So outside of that, can you think of any other negatives to the ACA? There's quite a few, and I will, if you're totally clueless on this, you'll have a good understanding of it in a couple minutes, but any other negatives to it? Here's an easy one for you. What's not typically covered by health insurance? There's no dental care, because yeah, apparently teeth are magical rich people's like luxury bones. If you're rich, yeah, sure. You can have dental care. If you're poor, nope. The other huge thing, is everybody familiar with the term being underinsured? What does that mean? You have insurance, but what? It doesn't quite cover a whole heck of a lot. So yeah, you're technically insured, but you are underinsured, meaning if something catastrophic happens to you, you're going to be paying ultimately for that at the end of the day. And you saw those rates shoot up during the Obama presidency. People got insurance, but it wasn't very good insurance. So there's huge gaps in coverage ultimately. Now, why do you think some members of Congress and within Obama's own party, during this time period, the debate over whether we should pass the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare or not, there was a big debate in terms of should we maybe pass a public option or should we pass Medicare for all? Why do you think some members of Congress pushed so hard for that in particular?
It's hard for poor people to buy insurance.
Definitely, and I love this cartoon. If you are uninsured or if you are underinsured, what is your day-to-day or week-to-week life like? Horrible. You're on a tightrope. Any little thing that could happen to you health-wise, that could destroy you and your entire family ultimately for generations. So that's one of the big things is people started to realize, wait, maybe we should push for a public option or something along those lines that'll actually cover everyone so we don't have, these huge gaps in insurance or people that are underinsured. Because I'll go back to, this was a very scary moment for my family, and I'm sure everybody here has a similar story like this. But last year, our son was diagnosed with a pretty significant heart issue, and he needed to have an ablation done as a 5-year-old. Okay, we had to take him out to Rochester, and he, have a pretty serious surgery in order to fix his heart issues because his resting heart rate was almost 200 beats a minute. It was insane. So we were terrified, obviously. Now, thankfully, we have good insurance, through our school district, which we're very thankful and lucky for. But then you always get this statement at the end of each month from your health insurance company. If you guys can look closely up at that, it tells you what you would have paid if you didn't have insurance. What would have happened to us if we did not have health insurance coverage for our son?
It would have been a death for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. Can you see the number up there? How much would it have cost us? $20,000. Do you think most Americans can just whip out 20 grand and cover a medical bill? Hell no. Okay, so that tells you why there was a big push. Let's get a public option passed so things like this can never happen to somebody that's uninsured or underinsured. But that didn't ultimately end up going through, unfortunately, because what ended up happening instead, the Democratic Party decided to give in to certain members of their party, like Joe Lieberman, who you might remember from one of the more moderate senators from Connecticut. He did not want a public option. Joe Lieberman collected tons and tons of money from the health insurance corporations, from the pharmaceutical industry. So in order to get Obamacare passed, they decided we're going to drop the public option, we're going to drop any type of Medicare for all, and just get this thing over the finish line. And a lot of people fell through the cracks as a result. That's really what I'm trying to show you here. So that's some key things to keep in mind, because without a public option to provide an alternative for the people of the U.S., what's going to happen with the cost of private health insurance moving forward? Skyrockets. Okay, this chart is absolutely nuts. So what this shows you is health expenditure per capita and then life expectancy on the left, okay? Who's the big outlier here? Us. We spend the most per person, and what do we get in return?
Cancer.
Yep,
Yeah.
less life. Okay, so our life expectancy has basically flatlined. Meanwhile, we are paying more and more for health insurance. That seems like a pretty bad deal to me. I don't know. So you look at us compared to other countries, we are the outlier when it comes to this. So that's one of the big things that happened as a result of Obamacare. I'll give you, a better graph that really dissects it in more detail. A U.S. individual spends twice as much on healthcare compared to other countries. And one thing, and I know this might be tough for some of you to see, do you see the light blue on this graph? What costs do Americans have to pay for that other countries do not have to pay for? What are administrative costs? Who are we paying all the time that other countries don't have to pay? Insurance companies. That's what the administrative cost is. So that's where your money's going to, and they're jacking up rates constantly. That's why we spend twice as much as any other country on the planet. Even just our hospital stays are miles beyond what any other country experiences. So it's really stark once you start to break this down. And a few other things that I just want to focus on as well. Like you compare us to, let's say, like China, for instance. China does a great job when it comes to spending on health insurance. They have a life expectancy that has now surpassed us. And I like this breakdown in terms of healthy life expectancy. Like at what age can you expect to live a good, healthy life without major, insurance complications or major health complications, I should say? You can see that we lag behind the rest of the world when it just comes to basic healthy life expectancy. And it's because of this. China just spends more on their people. They put more of their money actually into their citizens to make sure that their health needs are met. No different than a country that you might not expect, Cuba as well. Same exact thing up here. You look at the cost per person, Cuba just puts more basically into their citizens. They don't have all those administrative costs, and what they get is a higher life expectancy than the United States. Okay, so Cuba, because healthcare is their big thing, that's what they primarily focus on, they have a higher life expectancy than the United States while spending per capita a lot less because they concentrate their money in smart ways. They have a better infant mortality rate than we do, which is one of the most depressing things I can possibly think of, but it's because they focus a lot on healthcare, which we just don't. So what I'm going to take a deep dive into is exactly how our private health insurance industry works. And this is, again, I hope you take something away from this. Another pretty solid cartoon up here, but what is the argument in this cartoon? What's the main point? What is the root cause of this problem? It's money. How are you viewed by the health insurance industry here? You're a number, okay? Another great cartoon. What drives all the decisions inside of this country when you're talking about healthcare? Money, the profit motive. That's it. Okay, so always keep that in mind. The root cause of this is capitalism. Okay, the profit motive is what drives decisions inside of the healthcare industry. Your health is secondary. Decisions are secondary. If it makes money, that's the driving factor. That's what leads to a lot of major issues when you look at the health insurance industry in particular. So always keep that in mind. Because the fact of the matter is this, if you don't qualify for Medicaid or if you're not old enough to get Medicare, how do most people in this country get their health insurance? Through your employer. Okay, that's basically it. No other country on the planet operates this way. Okay, we're the only country where you have to be employed and your employer needs to provide you with health insurance in order to actually get some semblance of coverage. Can you take a second and think about what is the ultimate point of that? Why do we do this? What is the point of only offering really for most people inside of this country? You gotta be employed and you gotta rely on your employer in order to get this. Yeah, Sharon?
To keep you healthy enough to toil in the factory.
That's it. Just enough so you can operate those machines. Yep, definitely. Yep.
So you're beholden to your employer.
Are you ever gonna go on strike or ask for a raise from your employer? What could they easily do with you? They could fire you, and then there goes your health insurance. And then you're just kind of, well, good luck. Figure it out from there. So that's really the point. It's a semblance of control, if you really want to break it down as simply as possible. So that's what we have, is basically this private, for-profit health insurance industry. And this is one of the saddest things, and I'm assuming a lot of people have personal experience with this. How do, like, United Healthcare, Humana, how do they make such massive profits where now you have groups making $300, $400 billion a year? How do they make that much money? Yeah.
You cut coverage.
They cut coverage. They deny claims. That's their biggest thing. The company that is the worst when it comes to that is United Healthcare, okay? 32% of the time, they reject claims. That's a any of these numbers I think is completely unacceptable, to be honest with you. 32% is obscene. And do you know how they do it? Oh yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how to do it, but I just wanted to say, do you remember Alan Grayson?
Oh, that name sounds familiar, yeah.
Oh, he was wonderful. He would have a chart in the house, and it would say, don't get sick, and if you do get sick, die early.
That's What a sad but perfect summer. Yes. Now the way that United Healthcare, and this is disgusting to me, but Neil, yeah, you want to give it a shot?
AI.
They use AI. They have automated systems that just blanket deny health claims. So they use AI in the most evil way that you can possibly imagine, where it's just, oh yeah, the robot says, done. Boot them to the curb, and then they hope that people just give up, which again, a lot of people are busy and it gets tough to do that sort of stuff. So I'll show you a couple of horror stories, especially with United Healthcare in particular, because they use AI to deny people claims. Like, take a look at stuff like this. And these are not isolated cases. What did United Healthcare do here? Who did they deny? Yeah, chemotherapy. Okay, because she's too far gone at this point, so we're not going to pay out for that. Here's another one. This is nuts. This individual had just passed away, so his health insurance technically lapsed, which meant, what did he not have covered? His ambulance ride to the morgue. Okay, so they denied coverage when it came to that. There's just too many stories like that. Here's another one, but this individual, he wrote this 5 days before he passed away because his health insurance company decided to deny him his treatments for prostate cancer. So he was just trying to highlight that's kind of how evil this system ultimately is. Because the basics are this. When you take this, and the government's not intervening here, obviously. They're taking that very laissez-faire, that very hands-off approach. All throughout history, who wins and who loses when the government takes this hands-off approach? Who's the big winner all the time in this scenario? The rich, corporations. Everybody else is the big loser. So what this ultimately leads to, even if you do have healthcare coverage, I think a lot of people are well-versed in this, medical debt is one of the biggest issues inside of this country that typically gets brushed aside and ignored, and that is a damn shame, because it's something that ravages people, it ravages families. You look at the statistics up here for this. Look at the green part of this graph. This is showing you that 78% of the people that have medical debt have more than $10,000 in medical debt. Okay, so that's a massive number. You're going to be paying that off probably for the rest of your life when you look at interest rates and those sorts of things. There's other statistics as well. You can see it broken down by state. I'll simplify this for you. The darker the blue on this map, the more people inside of that state have medical debt. Okay, so you can see where the issues are located in particular, but it's a problem everywhere. It's just worse in some areas compared to others. And then the sad thing is, like, there's a great study that I found of, like, how does medical debt start? What's the biggest way that medical debt starts to pile up in this country? Just doing what? Just going to the doctor. Just going to a basic checkup is something that can start somebody down the very dark path of acquiring massive amounts of medical debt. Look at the other things as well. And then even if you have surgery and if you're underinsured, you're not covered, you pay way more in surgery compared to just about every other country on the planet, or at least those similar ones like I showed you. And this comes at a cost. This is very sad. But what do a lot of people have to do, or what do they have to sacrifice once you go down this dark path of medical debt? You gotta beg for money? Or what do you have to do? Cut back on food, cut back on any sort of savings that you might have. Just basically sacrifice everything in order to pay off that debt, so it ravages people, like I said. And the end result of this is, almost 50,000 people die due to lack of health coverage every single year. And what do people do? And this is just enraging to me. A lot of people that are buried in medical debt and have no other way of paying it off. Do you know what strategy or tactic or what they use in order to try to gain some money to pay off a massive, chemo bill or prescription drug plan,
Crowdfunding.
okay? So I don't know if you've seen GoFundMes and pages like this. Does anybody know like what GoFundMe was originally set up to do? It wasn't to pay off people's medical bills. You know what GoFundMe was originally created to do? It was to fund like interesting tech projects. Okay, that's why it started. It's morphed into this. Okay, because now you have families trying to raise money for children with leukemia because they can't pay it off themselves and the government's not going to help out to actually cover it. Or even this guy, I'm glad that he got the funding that was necessary, but he just wanted a 90-day prescription drug plan, okay? Now, the sad fact is, do you think most of these GoFundMe campaigns actually succeed? Throw out a percentage, I'll tell you if you're close. What percent of these GoFundMe campaigns actually work? Yeah.
5.
Close, it's a little higher. Yeah, maybe it's better than you think, but it's still pretty bad. It's 12%. Okay, so most people, they don't get the crowdfunding that's necessary, and they're left with medical debt probably for the rest of their lives. This is kind of crass, but sadly true. You can't die yet, you're still short a little bit of money, okay? And then other stuff that I think people are familiar with, everybody knows EpiPen. Do you know what's happened with the price of EpiPens, especially recently? Skyrocketed through the roof. Another one, insulin costs. Why is this incredibly dangerous? EpiPen, insulin, you kind of need that to survive, okay? So those numbers are exorbitant. And then I want to show you this, which I think is fascinating. You compare, these are the exact same drugs, okay? But this is the price that they are sold in the United States compared to the price that they are sold in Canada. Can somebody pinpoint why we see a difference? Again, these are the exact same drugs. There's no difference here. But why do we pay more? One cares about profit. Yeah, it's as simple as that. Do you know what the Canadian government does that our government does not do? They put caps on it. They negotiate with drug companies, and they basically say, if you want to sell your products here, you're going to have to agree to our rates. What do we do instead? Set the price, and if they can afford it, awesome. If they can't, they can take out a nice little loan from Chase Manhattan Bank. So that's it. And in this stuff, when you really start to critically think about this, it really frustrates me. Have you seen like St. Jude commercials? I don't know exactly how I want to broach this, but I guess if you can just answer my question. Why are these ads actually incredibly dystopian when you sit there and think about it? Why are these nightmare scenarios actually? Yeah, sure.
Money is the cure.
Money is the cure. Okay, and you're basically saying we have to beg in order to get children basic cancer treatments, but yeah.
And you're like making these poor kids, like say beg for it.
Yeah, they're being like exploited in a way, yeah.
And it's also just going to the big hospital, not directly to the children. So
Exactly.
we don't know how they're using that money.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, they're not going directly to these treatments sometimes, it's going to this fund, and then maybe it'll get to the kids, but who knows?
On a very small level and a totally different topic, it's the reason I would never send in cereal box caps to school for a Xerox machine.
Oh, right.
The school needs a Xerox machine.
Just give them the money. Yeah, exactly.
The school should,
That's a great point.
public education and public health should cover that.
No doubt. And that's what's so upsetting to me. You should never have to have a kid get in front of a TV and beg for money to get cancer treatments. That just shouldn't happen.
Well, capitalism regulates itself.
You got it. Oh, great point. That's a great point, yes. Here's a question for you. Should what the private healthcare companies do today, should that be classified as a form of murder?
Yes.
Could you make that argument?
Yes.
Okay. No, thanks. All right, this is in your packet that I gave you, but I want to make you aware of a term that I don't think many people are familiar with, but so this is Frederick Engels, coined the term social murder. So I'll read this for you. It's on like page 2 or 3 of the packet that was on your seat when you walked in, but he describes social murder as something that's committed by the political and social elite, where they knowingly permit conditions to exist where the poorest and most vulnerable in society are deprived of the necessities of life and are placed in a position in which they cannot reasonably be expected to live and will inevitably meet an early and unnatural death. Okay, so that is what he argues is social murder. It's not as obvious as somebody, committing a straight up manslaughter or murder or something like that. It's a little bit more insidious. It's behind the scenes. It's not as well viewed or seen by most people. So I think this is pretty apropos of what I'm talking about here, but 0 people die when a protester shatters a Starbucks window. Tens of thousands die each year because the market denies them health care coverage. The state deems one of these a violent act and the other not. This is because capitalism values private property over human life. I think that's a nice summation of kind of what I'm talking about here. So we have to talk about this event that happened just back in December of 2024. Does everybody remember the murder of the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson, in December of this past year? Okay, so he was gunned down in the streets of New York City by an individual who I'll get to in a second. But for Brian Thompson himself, he's the head of United Healthcare, that, the biggest health insurance corporation on the planet, the one that's raking in almost $400 billion. Do you know what his annual compensation was each year? How much do you think Brian Thompson made?
100 million.
I guess it's a little lower than you think, but still significant. So with all of his stock options and all that sort of stuff, $10.2 million. And why do you think he's being rewarded so much? He's making them more money by denying claims. They have the highest denial rate, like I showed you, of 32%. So, when the rich rob the poor, it's called business. When the poor fight back, it's called violence. So, this is going to be an argument that I'll present to you. You can take it any way that you want, but Brian Thompson being gunned down is murder, but Brian Thompson denying a whole bunch of people health insurance, might that also be murder as well? Okay, you can make that case. Now, does anybody remember the name of the individual that committed the act? Allegedly. Allegedly, excuse me, I need to be very legalese about this. Allegedly. Because yes, there's been no trial. There's been no trial. Who are we talking about? Luigi Mangione. Yep. Do you remember what he had, or what he allegedly had, excuse me, on his bullets? Deny, defend, depose. So allegedly, Luigi was arrested in Pennsylvania, and when he was arrested, he did release a brief statement, which some outlets called a manifesto, but they pretty much erased all trace of this today. But I will read this for you. This is not in your notes, but this is in Luigi's own words. This is from a very respected journalist who actually got his statement of why he may have done this. Was this. Okay, so he says this, a reminder, the U.S. has the #1 most expensive healthcare system in the world, yet we rank roughly 42nd in life expectancy. United Healthcare is the largest company in the U.S. by market cap behind these other, big conglomerates. It has grown and grown, but has our life expectancy? No. The reality is these companies have simply gotten too powerful, and they continue to abuse our country for immense profit because the American public has allowed them to get away with it. Obviously, the problem is more complex, but I do not have the space, and frankly, I do not pretend to be the most qualified person to lay out the full argument. But many have illuminated the corruption and greed. He mentions Michael Moore, which I'll show you the documentary Sicko, which is a revolutionary documentary, and then a book by Rosenthal decades ago, and the problems simply remain. It is not an issue of awareness at this point, but clearly power games at play. Evidently, I am the first to face it with such brutal honesty. Why do you think this manifesto or statement was not widely circulated, and it's really tough to find it today? Yeah. Yeah. Here's an easy one for you. How do you think the corporate press and American politicians responded to this event in December? Yes. Here was an actual op-ed from the New York Times. Who's the real working class hero? That's Brett Stevens, who has some wild takes if you ever want to read the New York Times op-ed page. But yeah, that's what his argument was. No, Brian Thompson's actually the good guy in this scenario. And then this, the corporate media blitz surrounding us, I think, was fascinating. What did you see in all these major media networks right after the murder happened?
Oh, like movies?
Movies, and how do you think these movies were maybe portrayed? Or what was maybe the message of all these documentaries that came out? Exactly. So, and then this. Local news, I think, also does a really bad job of covering this sort of stuff. Why don't you take a second? There's a local anchor in Minnesota. Okay, take a look at her statement up here. What's her clear message?
He's a human.
You should feel bad for Brian Thompson. He's a human with a family. However, think about local news coverage. What will you never see an anchor like this actually covering on the local news, whether it's in Minnesota, whether it's in Utica? What do you never see on the local news that should probably be covered, at least in my eyes, I don't know, every single day?
How many humans with a family he killed?
Exactly. Or just issues with healthcare inside of our area. You never see that on the news, okay, which I think is an absolute disgrace. And then politicians obviously got involved in this. Are at least some of you familiar with Josh Shapiro? He is the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania. He gave a statement on the alleged murder by Luigi Mangione of Brian Thompson. I have it underlined up here. Can you take a second and find, I don't know, maybe a semblance of hypocrisy in Governor Shapiro's statement? Yeah. Yeah, we'll get to that in a sec. Yeah, no, great example. I'll show you that, yeah.
America was founded on a war of different views.
Right, but he's saying we never in our history resolve these issues when it comes to violence. We're just not a violent nation. This is not what we do.
I mean, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think probably just, yeah, no, good point. Because here's Josh Shapiro a couple months prior to this. What was he signing? He's signing bombs. Okay, but we don't resolve policy issues with violence. We're not just savages. We don't do that sort of stuff. So, what's up?
No, those are for Russia.
Yeah, it's Ukraine, but yeah, regardless. This is just a great kind of point of what I'm talking about here, but people that say, I don't know, man, I don't think violence is ever the answer. Well, here's the truth. You live in America, the most violent country on earth, born through genocide and slavery and maintained to this day through brutal imperialism. At home, its healthcare, housing, food, energy, and prison system depends on the daily grinding violence. Your tax dollars are used to murder babies and toddlers around the world as we speak, which I think unfortunately we've seen too much of lately, while you remain silent and pretend not to notice. Your entire life as an American is built on a mountain of corpses. Kind of spare me the naivete. Okay, so that's the facts when you actually know the history of this country. I don't, but I can, the whole presentation will be shared with you if you're interested in it. But then obviously Trump got in on the action when it came to this. What is he seeking for, Luigi? The death penalty. And you can read his statement up here. It's kind of along the same exact lines of everything else that I've showed you. But why do you think people as powerful as the president have taken such a keen interest in this event?
You want copycats?
They want any copycats. Do you think the ruling class is terrified by what happened here? Definitely. They don't want to see it again, so they're going to make an example out of him to make sure that this stops, dead in its tracks. So that's why you've seen major politicians take such an interest in this. If you have never seen this documentary, I cannot recommend it enough. Now, granted, it came out before Obamacare was passed, but the stories that Michael Moore highlights are the same stories that you hear today. It's no different. And this is something, just to show you how effective this documentary was. One of my very close friends in college, if you attended my last program where we covered the Iraq and Afghanistan war, we talked about shock and awe, and at my dorm room when we started bombing Iraq, all my friends cheering as bombs were dropping on innocent civilians. One of my close friends was sitting right next to me, cheering on that event. 5 years later, he watched Sicko, and he started to realize, oh, maybe I've been propagandized my entire life, and my entire worldview is a joke. So this was a revelatory documentary for him that's now set him on the path where we talk about things that are much more progressive today. So a documentary like this, I think, goes a long way. So if you haven't seen it, great deep dive into the healthcare industry, kind of goes through a lot of the same stuff that I've gone through as well. Then when you look at media coverage, it's enraging to me, but what sort of stories do people want to see covered? What's one of the number one things up here? They want to see stories, surrounding healthcare coverage, and they don't get it. The last election, what was the number one issue for voters? Healthcare. Obviously, it's something that impacts everyone. However, between Kamala and Trump, if you watch those debates were just, not even worth your time ultimately, because there's nothing of, substance happening on those stages. They barely talked about healthcare reform at all, even though it was the number one issue that voters ultimately wanted to hear. Do you know why it's become such a side issue today when it comes to the actual Democratic Party and the Republican Party? They're both on the payroll. It really is as simple as that. This is the biggest lobbying groups inside of the country. Who is the biggest lobbying group in the country? Big Pharma. And then the healthcare industry is not far behind. So these politicians are bought and sold to not change the system and keep it the status quo, and don't even mention it anymore. You rarely even hear it. And the fact of the matter is this. If we had a solid universal healthcare program, you would save over 200,000 lives, and you'd actually save money as well. So it's a win-win across the board, because if you're just a sociopath that cares about money, well, here's your answer right here, okay? And then the human lives are also kind of nice as well. But you don't see any push for that anymore. Even though if you look at recent polling, do you know what percentage of the American population, like at least, wants to see a Medicare for all sort of plan? You know what the latest poll said? High 60s, 70%. And you see no push in terms of the government actually addressing that, that's crazy. Now, how do people who have health insurance, how do they pay for their coverage though in the US? What's the typical way that most Americans pay for their health insurance coverage? What are those things that come out of your paycheck every 2 weeks? Your what? Your premiums, okay? I'll show you my pay stub. Can you spot how much money comes out of my paycheck every 2 weeks to cover my health insurance premiums? Yeah, $278 every 2 weeks, and then $51 for dental, which also doesn't cover anything. So, yeah, just free money for the dental company basically. But yeah, so it's over $500 plus, almost $600 ultimately per month in order to pay for my health insurance. So it's not free. I'm paying an exorbitant amount, and I'm sure it's no different for most people here. And the fact of the matter is, have wages increased at the same rate of premiums? No, and it's not even close, okay? The orange line is deductibles, the green line is premiums, and then workers' earnings is the little line that you see all the way down at the bottom. So our wages have flatlined, meanwhile the cost of health insurance has just gone through the roof. And you look at the change throughout the years of single and family coverage, those are the average rates that a family pays in premiums. You're looking at 20 grand a year. And even with those plans, sometimes you're underinsured, and there's those massive gaps in coverage like we talked about. And then this is a heck of a graph. What has ballooned? Who are the administrators? CEOs, bureaucrats inside of these massive health insurance corporations. They've added more people than ever before. What are we not adding inside of this country? Doctors, people that actually treat individuals. That's very telling, I guess. And the other thing, even if you have a solid health insurance plan, is everybody familiar with a deductible? Okay, so deductibles, if you're not familiar with this, it basically means before your health insurance covers a dime, you need to pay out of pocket a certain amount. And I'll give you a sad example, but look at this up here. The last time, and this was in 2020, so the health insurance exchange, if you want to buy a plan on the Affordable Care Act, ultimately, or Obamacare, the cheapest plan was $402 a month, and how much was the deductible? So you have to pay $6,500 out of pocket before your health insurance company chips in at all. That's an obvious way that people are going to go into medical debt. So those are that's per year, exactly. And sometimes it's per claim, which is even worse. Yeah.
Didn't you used to get penalized for not getting health insurance if you didn't, so you're still somehow getting screwed over money-wise?
Either way, yes. Great example. And then is everybody familiar with a copay as well? So not only that, every time you go to the doctor, you got to pay a copay. Some copays, like we're fortunate, again, for my health insurance plan, we pay $10 every time we have to go to the doctor, or one of us has to go to the doctor. Other people not so lucky. There's some plans that have a $100 copay with it. Every single time you go to the doctor, you have to pay $100. Okay, that adds up very quickly, especially if you're somebody with significant health issues. So I think you get it. But why is this system brutal for working class people? Keeps you down. Why do you think most countries have stopped doing this? Yeah, that's it. It's just a basic sanity, okay? Here's a great example. That is New Brunswick, Canada, and then a town, or just Maine as a state, as a comparable up here. So you have New Brunswick in Canada, and then Maine. If you can't see this, I will break it down as easily as I can for you. So the population's kind of similar, about 1 million people or so. The median age in New Brunswick, Canada, and then in the state of Maine is pretty similar. What do you notice about the average deductible, though, between a citizen in New Brunswick, Canada, and a citizen in the U.S.? You pay $4,000. What does a Canadian pay? Nothing. What's the premium like? Yeah, nothing in Canada, about $450 here. What are the number of uninsured? Oh yeah, 100,000 people uninsured in Maine. Nobody's uninsured in Canada. Percentage of people with medical debt? Yeah, Maine's got 18%. Canada has none. And then what do you notice about the life expectancy? It's higher in Canada, which is obvious when you look at this situation that our health insurance companies are in. And then the last thing, the average tax burden, because that's always the argument that you hear, is this is going to balloon everyone's taxes if we have Medicare for all, or if we cover everybody with some semblance of a universal health care plan. Can somebody do the math? And I'm not a math person. What is the difference? Not even 1%. And what do they get for it? More life. Okay? That's why every other country on the planet basically has some semblance of universal health care. We do not. However, we do spend a whole bunch of money on something else. Oh yeah, we'll spend almost $1 trillion on the military budget, but we just don't have enough to cover everybody when it comes to universal health care. It's too tough. Because, it's such a complex beast that only 32 of the world's 33 developed nations have figured it out. So it's too complicated. Oh, the U.S. Yeah. Okay, good question. Good question. So, and then lastly, and then we'll take a break. Again, my wife and I, this is our first ever vacation. We went to Italy back, November of last year. So, that's kind of an embarrassing story, but regardless. When we got to our hotel, I went to go take a shower. My wife noticed something on my back. I don't know how the hell this happened, but there was a tick on my back. I don't know how that possibly happened. Maybe
Clinton's riddled.
Oh, yeah, Clinton is riddled with tick, so it could be that. So I think I carried it from Clinton all the way to Italy. But regardless, we were scrambling, we didn't know what to do, and then we decided to just kind of go down and talk to our, the front desk person, the concierge. And he was like, "You have what?" He's like, "Go to one of the pharmacies around town, maybe they'll be able to help you." I have no idea what you're talking about. So what we noticed in Italy, they have pharmacies on every single street corner. I just walked into one. I didn't have to present a health insurance card. I didn't have to present anything. One of the pharmacists, who was well-trained medically, just took me in the back, removed the tick, and then they gave me a 5-day course of antibiotics for $3. Just no questions asked, just here you go. Oh, you need some dicey, here you go. You get it, but yeah.
I fell off a bike in Italy, cut open my head,
Yep.
bruised my ribs, had an ambulance ride, a CAT scan, 3 X-rays,
This is a much better story.
Dramamine shot because I threw up with a painkiller. And when it was all done, I said, "How do I pay you for this?" They said, "Oh, it was an accident. You don't pay for accidents." I came home and spent more money having the stitches taken out.
Sure you did. Great example. What would have happened to Ruth if she was in this country?
You medical debt for the rest of the
Yeah, you'd be paying for the rest of your life. Okay. All right. We'll take a 10-minute break if you want any water, or I have some animal crackers in the back as well. But I really hope that you stick around. I have some excellent questions that I want to discuss with you, and a few other key events during the Obama administration that I don't think you want to miss. So we'll take about a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 7:15, and we'll pick up where we left off. So I'd really appreciate it if you stick around. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Let's pick up where we left off. So this won't take me quite as long because obviously the health insurance piece was the biggest thing that I wanted to focus on. We'll go through a couple other major events during the Obama administration's time period. So his re-election in 2012, that's when he defeated Mitt Romney. And that also was not really a super close election either. A little bit closer than when he took on John McCain. But that's when Obama won re-election, was in 2012. What we'll go through is a few other major events. But for this, I know I've shown you this graph multiple times. If somebody can quickly summarize it for people that are new, this is each administration, going back to LBJ's time period. Do you remember what it meant when it came to the wealth gap if you're on the northern part of this graph? What happened to the wealth gap during that presidency if it's on the northern portion? The wealth gap increased. Okay, now obviously the Reagan presidency massively increased the wealth gap, but so did the Obama presidency as well. So you notice he's right there behind Reagan, and pretty much every president. You've seen the wealth gap increase. The last time we saw a decrease was LBJ back in the late 60s. So that's pretty telling. We'll go through these one by one. So let's start with President Obama and his immigration policies that, again, I don't think people are super well versed in. One of the big differences that you notice, now granted, this is the first Trump term compared to Obama's time period, but there was more ICE removals during Obama's time period than the first Trump term in particular, which, again, I don't think a lot of people know about. That's why Obama had the moniker of the deporter-in-chief. And that was something that he was unfortunately well known for, especially among the immigrant population during his presidency. And I think everybody's familiar with those detention camps at the border, but they first popped up during the Obama presidency. Okay, he was the one that actually had those camps constructed in the first place. And the conditions there were still pretty bad. Granted, they were even worse during Trump's time period, and then continuing with Biden, and then back to Trump again, but this is the genesis of it. Okay, so this is where it actually started. And you notice the funding for ICE detention over the years continually increasing during the Obama presidency. So he funded that organization that is now, I mean, you've seen videos, you've seen the pictures of ICE just running wild across the country, and a lot of unfortunate things happening as a result. And then all we've really changed is the terminology surrounding it. So during Obama's time period, they were immigration detention centers, then Trump's kids in cages, and then Biden's migrant child facility. All we've done is soften the language, but the conditions for these individuals, these human beings, are exactly the same. So it's important to point that stuff out. And then just one more thing. I don't know if you pay any attention to the news lately when you're talking about ICE, but Tom Homan is basically like Trump's right-hand man when you're talking about deportations and massive mistreatment of immigrants. Who got this guy started in the first place inside of the government? Obama. He actually gave him an award back in 2015. So again, this is where this all kind of stems from. And then this is something that definitely changed my life, and I'm sure people here were impacted by it as well, but the Black Lives Matter movement, and then President Obama's role during all these brutal police killings in particular. These are just a semblance of some of the African Americans that were killed by police during the 2010s. I'll go through a couple of them with you and then really highlight Obama's role in all this. One of the first ones was the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri by Darren Wilson. What happened to Darren Wilson? Was there any charges for him? None whatsoever. And that's where you saw people take to the streets, and obviously violent protests start to break out in particular. National Guard was sent in. Obama, approved some of those, orders essentially. And then you see statements like this, like, no sympathy for violence in Ferguson. This is just completely unacceptable, but not really addressing those material concerns of what people were upset about to begin with. And then it just gets worse from there. I hope people remember Tamir Rice. Tamir Rice, he was 12 years old in Ohio. Do you remember what he was doing in a park? No, that's Trayvon Martin. Tamir Rice was playing with a toy gun. And what happened to him? And if you watch the security footage from the park, police just show up and shoot him dead right on the spot. It is heartbreaking, doesn't even cover it. But did Obama really do much about this? No, and even Tamir Rice's mom was very furious, don't you want to, take action, do something to address, these situations that are becoming more prevalent? But you saw nothing. And then the one that, I'll never forget this, Eric Garner in New York City. He was the one that was placed in that chokehold, brought to the ground, and then just suffocated to death ultimately, while consistently saying in more, heartbreaking terms, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. And then he just died. If you watch the video of it, it is horrific. Even afterwards, it's clear that he is unconscious and slowly losing his life. He's just sitting there on the hard concrete. Paramedics are sitting around. Nobody's doing anything. And he ultimately died, a short time afterwards. Was there any charges in this case? No. And even there was massive pressure on the Obama DOJ to actually do something about this, and Eric Holder, if you remember him, they were pushed. Can you bring some charges here and actually address this issue? They let everything lapse. No charges whatsoever when it came to the Eric Garner case. Again, that video, I'll never be able to forget it. And then this, Philando Castile, he was a cafeteria worker who the kids loved inside of the public school that he worked at. This video is brutal. He got pulled over for a basic traffic violation. He announced to the police officer that he had a gun in his possession. That's all he did. He had every legal right to have that gun. The cop just pulled out his gun and blew him away at point-blank range. His fiancée was in the seat next to him, and his 5-year-old daughter was in the back seat during this. Again, if you watch this video, it's something that you will never, ever forget. But then here's Obama's statement on all this. So it's absolutely true that the murder rate in the African American community is way out of whack compared to the general population. But we can't put the burden on police alone. It should not be an us versus them. Okay, so that's, he's making it quite plain when it comes to his message. And there's other horrific examples, but yeah, no.
Did he do anything to help the police if it was a burden that they can't do on their own?
Oh, great question. Yeah. And then Elijah McClain, highly autistic African American teenager. He used to play his violin for cats at pet shelters. He had a mental health episode, and cops tracked him down. And you can again watch the video. They eventually shot him full of ketamine, and his heart gave out because they were trying to calm him down. So they gave him massive amounts of ketamine, and he died as a result. Again, if you want to find these videos, they're there. Right? It's tough to watch, to say the least, but there was no charges when it came to Elijah McClain's murder either. And then Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, I think most people are familiar with obviously as well in Minnesota in 2020. But the end result, when you look at the statistics, is there any sort of accountability here for any of these murders? Barely. You're looking at 1% ultimately. And that's what led to the Black Lives Matter movement, which really culminated in 2020. Now, what methods did some resort to after no charges or arrests were taking place time after time after time, especially inside of Minnesota after the George Floyd violence? Okay, you saw violence actually taking place. You saw a police precinct burned down in 2020. And I really want you to pay close attention to this quote from Martin Luther King Jr., which I think is apt for what I'm talking about here. In MLK's eyes, a riot is what? Language of the unheard. Has anything happened up to this point when it comes to holding people accountable for these murders? So what are you going to do? Time to get, take the next step. What else can you possibly do? Peaceful protest has gotten you basically nowhere, so that's what ultimately ended up happening. Now, how did some people and politicians respond to that police precinct being burned down in Minnesota? What did you see?
Kneeled in solidarity, normatively.
Yep. And then you also saw this, Obama and again, this is after his presidency, but he still, has a major say in what happens, especially when it comes to just PR. But he said, everybody's a criminal and a thug that burned down that police station. Let's not excuse the violence. But I want to show you something interesting. Which one of these is a violent act in your eyes? Burning down that police station, or if you look closely at the graph, that's deaths due to the lack of health insurance coverage during the ACA. Which one's violence in the eyes of the state? The property damage, not the human beings being killed. And the last one that I want to show you, and Obama played a critical role in this, the Jacob Blake shooting in Minnesota in 2020. He was ultimately paralyzed, and this was right during, and this is going to be a weird transition, this happened during the NBA playoffs, okay? I don't know if anybody's a sports fan or not, but in response to this police shooting, do you know what NBA players organized and decided to do to support Jacob Blake and try to put some pressure on the government to actually address this issue? They didn't play. They decided to organize a boycott during the playoffs. And if you're not familiar, the NBA pulls in a ton of money. It's a massive, massive sport. And they decided to go on a boycott during the playoffs, which is when even more people pay attention to the NBA. So George Hill was a guard from the Milwaukee Bucks. He decided to organize this boycott, and he got major players on board. He got LeBron James, he got Chris Paul, the biggest NBA players possible at the time, to actually support him in this push for a boycott. So this was huge. They made a big statement, and they just said, we're not going to play until some charges are actually brought by the people that committed these horrific acts ultimately. So, how long do you think this boycott lasted, and who do you think helped to stop it dead in its tracks? Didn't even last a week. It lasted about a day. And do you know who was a pivotal player in stopping this boycott dead? It was Obama. Very good. Oh, man. Wow, yeah. Incredible. You're so good. It's first day here, and he's just killing it. Nice job. So, Barack Obama convinced the NBA players to end their strike and return to play. And he went to LeBron James, he went to Chris Paul, and he convinced all the other lower players that aren't quite as popular as you to give up this boycott and get back to playing, because we can actually do more good if we play instead of participating in the boycott. And what Obama basically argued was, if you wear your Black Lives Matter shirt during the playoffs, that's going to go so much farther than you actually boycotting the playoffs. And that's what ended up happening. What do you think is the end result of all this? Did any change take place? No. Okay, so it just got brushed to the side, completely ignored. That's why I think this meme is fantastic. Will Obama pull out all the stops to stop a labor strike? Will he pull out all the stops to give you health care? No. Yeah.
Do you remember when, like, someone on Fox News, I think it was LeBron, they told him to shut up and dribble?
Yes.
Like, how is this that much different? It's just semantics at this point.
That's a
right?
great point. Yes, excellent argument. And then this. Obama, when it comes to a labor strike, nah. Drone strike? Yeah. And then does everybody remember Colin Kaepernick when he was taking a knee in 2016 to protest, police killings? What happened here? Yeah, he was blacklisted from the NFL. He still can't play to this day, so he's just been not allowed back ultimately. Obama, has some statements when it came to this too, and then what you ended up with was this. Somebody like Jay-Z, famous rapper if you're not familiar with him, but he was very supportive of the BLM movement initially. And then he decided, I think I'm actually going to make a lucrative deal with the NFL to stop all these kneeling protests and just cut this dead in its tracks, because I think, again, we can do more good if you actually play during these events instead. And this is what's actually going to change people's hearts and minds when it comes to racism inside of the United States. What was the deal here? I don't know if anybody's a football fan. It still is there today.
He wrote end racism, right?
That's it, yes. Now what they encouraged was on the backs of players' helmets, you're going to put a statement that says end racism. So Tom Brady's going to wear his helmet, and on the back it's going to say end racism, and magically everybody's going to stop being a racist. Okay, so this is the performative stuff that is actually, to me, a lot more damaging in the long run, because those actual pushes to boycott or kneel, nobody wanted that stuff. That was brushed to the side. All right, so again, just something to keep in mind. And then this. The Flint water crisis in 2014, okay? If you're not familiar with this or you don't remember it, this was the Republican governor, Rick Snyder, who decided to make a deal to basically sell out the people of Flint, Michigan in order to save $5 million. So we're going to switch the water supply inside of Flint to a worse water supply. We think we're going to be able to make this change very quickly. Nobody's going to notice, and that is not what ultimately ended up happening. So look at the pipes inside of Flint, and then look at the statistics that eventually came out about the water that people were consuming inside of Flint, Michigan. And just so you know, 5 parts per billion of lead is cause for concern. That's in the top right. What was the worst sample inside of Flint, Michigan? 13,000. Okay, you're basically just drinking lead at that point. So this was horrific. You can even just look at the difference between Detroit water and then Flint, Michigan's water. And people obviously started to realize there's something going on here. There was a massive cover-up that took place. The government was saying, Flint water, it's safe to drink, don't worry about it. I know it looks a little weird, but it's fine, you can still consume it. And then they did a boil advisory. If you know anything about science, is one of the worst things you can possibly do, boil leaden water. Actually makes it worse. Okay, so people were consuming even worse levels of this. So this just kept kind of devolving, and I'll kind of jump ahead up here, but what you ended up seeing was massive issues when it came to children in terms of lead poisoning. Okay, so a lot of kids, and especially inside of Flint, that is a primarily African-American city, a lower class city, they were the people that were impacted the most by the Flint, Michigan water crisis. So lead poisoning started to go through the roof. You can look at all the pictures of people being tested, bottles of water needing to be brought in en masse. Meanwhile, the cost to fix this now, I know it's tough for you to see, now the cost to fix this is $1.5 billion. How much was Governor Rick Snyder trying to save initially with this? $5 million, and now it's going to cost $1 billion to actually fix this. There was massive protests that broke out, against Governor Snyder in particular, and water is a human right, and kids taken to the streets, and this kid arguing my life is worth more than $136. And then this, I think, is a fantastic cartoon. What happened to the kids of Flint, Michigan here with this crisis? What are we doing to them? Just killing them. They've thrown them into poison, basically. Another fantastic cartoon. Who gets to drink clear water, and who gets to drink poison water? African American community. Okay, so I think that one's very telling. But again, I'll skip ahead here. I think you get the point. The media did a terrible job of actually covering this. So how much did networks cover the Flint water crisis before 2016? This was going on for 2 years, by the way, okay? MSNBC did the best job, but even still, look at that total up there. How much did they cover it in the 2 years that this was going on? Over an hour. What do you notice about the rest of the news networks? Barely covered it all, 2 minutes tops. So no coverage up here when it came to this. And then Obama's response, because there's a lot of pressure on President Obama to actually finally address this because it's been going on for so long and there's no action being taken. I'm going to play you this video clip, and I'll just get your own reaction to it. So this is Obama in Flint, Michigan in 2016.
That's how we invested in community colleges and land-grant colleges like Michigan State. We invest. Can I get some water? Come on up here. Give me some water. I want a glass of water. I want a glass of water. Sit down. Where do we go from here? Well, I'm still waiting for my water. Somebody obviously didn't hear me. Hold on a second. Now, the reason I know I'm okay is because I already had some Flint water. There we go. I really did need a glass of water. This is not a stunt. Now, I'm going to talk about this. Everybody settle down. This is a feisty crowd.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder why it's so feisty. But what he's claiming, this is not what? This is not a political stunt, what I'm doing up here. Did you notice anything about that sip of water that he took? Barely touched it. Okay, but he claimed after this meeting, and when he drank that water, at least a little bit of it, he claimed like, it's fine. It's totally safe to drink now. Everything's fine. We've corrected the pipes. Everything's back to the way that it should be. However, even still today, if you are under 6 years old, it is still advised in Flint, Michigan that you do not drink the tap water. And that's 9 years after that little political stunt. But yeah.
I think it was Michael Moore that reported this, like during the Flint water stunt that Obama pulled, a bunch of, I think it was at school, a bunch of teachers that were horrified because they knew the water had been shut off to the building. So that was like extra fake, his whole water thing.
Oh my, that's incredible. Yeah. That's crazy. Wow. And then obviously, do you think any government officials were held accountable for this disaster? No. Governor Rick Snyder, no charges against him for poisoning his own people. Other government officials, not charged at all. And then do you know what actually has happened to Rick Snyder, the Republican governor who caused this crisis in the first place as you flash forward to today? No, in charge of the EPA? That'd be a hell of a thing. No. Rick Snyder decided to endorse somebody for president in the 2020 election. Do you know who Rick Snyder endorsed? Not Trump. Rick Snyder endorsed Joe Biden. Joe Biden decided to publicly promote his endorsement of Rick Snyder. Okay? I would not want anything to do with this guy that, poisoned the entire group of children, but end result is, like I said, it's still a crisis inside of Flint, so that's very depressing. And then another one, Roe v. Wade. A lot of people forget about this, but President Obama, at least initially during his first term, he claimed that he was going to actually codify Roe v. Wade and guarantee a woman's right to choose. And if you're unfamiliar with that, if you codify a law, do you know what that does? It's kind of complex. I'll try to simplify it as best I can for you, but that's what he campaigned on. I'm going to codify Roe v. Wade. Do you know what that means? Yeah.
It's going to take something that's like technically legal, but it's not necessarily like in this is definitively legal. You take it and that's a law now, it's definitively legal.
Exactly. Instead of just a past precedent, which is what the Supreme Court does, it just makes it more lock solid. So it takes to move heaven and earth to actually undo a codified law. So that's what Obama campaigned on. He didn't get that done, and we all know what happened to Roe v. Wade in 2022. Got overturned. Okay, so it was a close decision, but Roe v. Wade got overturned, and even though most people did not want to see it overturned, the Supreme Court ultimately decided to do that because we left the door open for a more extreme Supreme Court to actually make that change. So now today, as you flash forward and you look at abortion rights inside of the United States, some states, now each state gets to dictate what they want to do when it comes to abortion laws. I'll give you an example of a couple that are incredibly harsh. Here's Arkansas' state law when it comes to abortion, and here's Texas' state law when it comes to abortion. If you get an abortion in Arkansas, do you see what the punishment is? You're going to be in jail for up to 10 years and a fine of what? $100,000. And Texas is even worse. If you flash forward to Texas, $100,000 and maybe jail of up to not more than 99 years or less than 5 years. Okay, so up to 99 years is what they're saying. So that's pretty bad. All right, the last thing that I'll cover, and then I have some questions that I really want to hear people's thoughts on, like usual, but Obama's foreign policy, one of the big things that he campaigned on was closing Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. That was something that he said, I'm going to do, and he says it right here, make no mistake, we will close Guantanamo prison, like, immediately. That did not happen at all. So that was a major failure, huge shortcoming. Then obviously we talked about this last week, but the drone strike program in Afghanistan in particular, you know, Obama inherited this war from George W. Bush and just escalated it even worse. If you look at the statistics when it comes to civilians killed by drone strikes, President Obama, sadly, is way worse than George W. Bush when you look at that drone strike program in particular. And I did show this to you, but again, for people that weren't here last week, that's the amount of civilians that were killed by these drone strikes, the amount of children. I showed you this, but again, just to highlight it again, if President Obama apologized for one civilian drone victim a day, every day, it would take 3 years to actually fully apologize to everyone. That's pretty damning. And that's why I also showed you this, but there's, you know, some social difference between these two political parties, but when you're talking about warfare, they're pretty much in lockstep with each other. And then lastly, do you remember when we talked about Julian Assange, the guy who showed all the war crimes that were being committed during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars? Do you remember the role that Hillary Clinton played in the Obama administration? Remember what her job was? She was the Secretary of State. Okay, so she was the Secretary of State. This leaked from WikiLeaks, but Hillary Clinton at one point, you can read the statement up here. What did she want to do to Julian Assange because he exposed those war crimes? Can we just drone this guy? That's messed up, to say the least. And then the last thing I want to go through, and there's multiple examples of this, but what Obama did inside of the country of Libya, in northern Africa in particular. Does anybody remember the name of the leader of Libya prior to Obama's intervention inside of that country? And this is tough foreign policy stuff. It's a little bit dense. I'll make it as simple as I can, but you know the name of the leader? Yes, Muammar Gaddafi. Now, if you're not familiar with this term, Gaddafi was a Pan-African leader, and maybe this picture will simplify it for you. If you were a Pan-African leader, what did you want to do with like all the states inside of Africa? Unify all of them, okay? Do you know why he wanted to do this? And all Pan-African leaders, why they want to do that? Unify the African states or countries. But
he wanted to unify the currency that can stand up, gold-backed against the dollar.
Perfect, exactly. Who is not going to like that one bit? The United States. And again, one other reason why, has anybody ever heard of something called AFRICOM? That's a real tough. AFRICOM is our U.S. military operations inside of the continent of Africa, where we have over 50 military bases scattered around Africa to maintain our domination of the continent ultimately. Do you now understand why we would not like somebody like Muammar Gaddafi? What does he really want to do with all those military bases and U.S. influence, basically? He wants to get rid of them, okay? Like, we should be able to dictate our own destiny. That's what a Pan-African leader was ultimately all about. And Gaddafi, you can think whatever you want of him, but I'll break it down as simply as I can. These were the things that Gaddafi guaranteed during his time period as the leader inside of Libya. Electricity was free. Everybody was guaranteed a home. there were some basic rights. Even literacy rates jumped from 25% to 75% during his time period. So there were massive gains for people inside of Libya. And like I said, you can't ignore that sort of stuff when you look at some of his accomplishments. However, the other thing that Libya has access to, they're one of the biggest oil producers on the planet. Okay, so keep that in mind. That'll obviously come into play here in a second. And there have been deals throughout the years with Gaddafi. He even met with Obama. He met with Tony Blair, who was the UK Prime Minister for a period of time as well. But regardless, let me flash forward to this. I hope at least some of you remember the Arab Spring protests in 2012. This happened across the Middle East and Northern Africa, where people started to rise up and try to overthrow some of their more repressive governments inside of these areas of the world. However, some of the rebels in these certain countries were a little bit more extreme when it came to believing in some kind of wild things, especially when you look at some religious groups in particular starting to rise up. So there was some great protests that broke out, like in Tunisia, for instance. That was led by women, and they made massive changes to the constitution inside of Tunisia, guaranteed rights for women. That was a beautiful thing. There was other countries that had more extremist groups pop up that wanted to topple the government so they could create a theocracy ultimately and take away rights from women and those sorts of things. And Libya was one of them, okay? So what ends up happening is this. How do you think the U.S. could capitalize on the Arab Spring? Why is the U.S. going to take an interest in these protests? What are they hoping for? Yeah, we can fund death squads, and who can we maybe install inside of these countries with this opening that we now have? Puppet government. Okay, somebody that's going to be much more beholden to our interests and U.S. capitalism and colonialism ultimately. So that's where Obama intervened, was in Libya. With the help of Hillary Clinton, who was his Secretary of State, they decided to authorize massive airstrikes against the country of Libya, a sovereign nation, in 2011. However, how do you always, and if you've paid any attention to me the past couple weeks, it should be a very easy question. Do you think the American public is going to just go ahead and be on board with just bombing Libya out of nowhere? Do you have to give the American public some sort of reason to go after somebody like Gaddafi? Yes. What was the lie that was ultimately told about Gaddafi that got the American public like, all right, yeah, I guess we should bomb this guy? Take a look at this. What was happening under Gaddafi's orders across the entire country of Libya? There's mass rapes taking place, and we have to stop this. Guess what we found out about these mass rapes that were allegedly taking place under Gaddafi's orders? Didn't happen. Okay, it wasn't true. But it gave us the opening to actually start authorizing these bombing campaigns. And Gaddafi, he knew this was coming. This is his quote up here. I'll read it for you if you can't see, but it's pretty plain. Obama wants to kill me, to take away the freedom of our country, to take away our free housing, medicine, education, food, replace it with American-style thievery called capitalism. But all of us in the third world know what that means. It means corporations run the countries, run the world, and the people suffer. Was he pretty on point here of what he saw happen? Yeah, guess what happened to Gaddafi? He got killed in the most brutal fashion by one of those extremist groups that popped up inside of Libya. I don't even want to detail you what they did to him, but if you look it up on your own, it is vile to the nth degree of what happened to Gaddafi in terms of his actual murder. After this happened, do you know who went on TV and gloated about this? It wasn't Obama. Hillary Clinton. This is her being interviewed by CBS News. Okay, so take a look at this or just listen to it. It's pretty telling.
No, it's so, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed reports.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure it did.
Despicable doesn't even put it into words, but she was gloating about this ultimately. So, end result, if you flash forward, do you know what Libya is like today?
They have open slave markets.
Yes, I will show you some examples of that in a second. So Libya is what we now coin a failed state. It doesn't even have a proper government. It's different extremist factions now just fighting over the land in basically a civil war. ISIS is kind of running wild inside of the country. The death toll is catastrophic. And just like what was mentioned, there are now open slave markets inside of Libya. That's how dire the situation is inside of that country. President Obama, afterwards, this was at the end of his time in office, because these airstrikes were in 2011, it became a failed state in 2012. In 2016, he did an interview with Chris Wallace, and what did he finally admit about his role in Libya? It was the worst mistake of his presidency, but read his full quote, because the headline doesn't give you the whole story up here. What is Obama still saying 4 years later with open slave markets inside of this country? It was still the right thing to do. We had to do it, regardless. Okay? So, this is what we're seeing now. And if you watch closely on certain independent news platforms, you can see a little bit closer of the dire situation. This is in 2025. Okay? So, I really like this person's message up here, though. So that's somebody being sold for $6,000 inside of Libya, an actual human being. And I like this quote up here, but I want you to see this picture every time Obama drops his annual music playlist. Never let this man escape his legacy, okay? Because that's what I want to end with, is how do you think, if you ask the regular American on the street, how is President Obama viewed in the United States today, for the most part, if you could generalize it? In a pretty positive light, okay? Absolutely. I actually won tickets in a lottery system, and I refused to give him. I refused to go because I didn't want to actually hear him speak. But yeah, like he does this every single year. He's really big on social media. He shows his Spotify playlist of his favorite songs from 2024, and everybody freaks out over it. Gets like 1 million likes on Instagram. And then if you look at polling today, Obama typically ranks in the top 10 still when it comes to presidential popularity. So he's right up there with FDR. He's right up there with Lincoln and JFK and Teddy Roosevelt, like, those presidents we've talked about in the past. So that's where he ranks today. And this is my final argument. And this is what I want to hear people's thoughts on. Can you make the argument that the failings of the Obama administration directly led to President Trump and where we are today? Can anybody make that argument? How could you make it? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, bringing it back to like the metaphor with the fox and the wolf that
Yeah.
you used with Malcolm X, I think people will start to see that the smiling fox is what it is, and they will vote for the wolf in hopes that it offers an alternative to that.
It's a good summation, yeah. Go ahead.
How can we tell that someone, say like Mondami, isn't gonna end up like another Obama?
That's something I'm very concerned about, absolutely. The thing that, I really like what Mamdani has done so far inside of New York City, like the platform that he's running on, I think is fantastic. But he's also still a member of the Democratic Party at the end of the day, and the Democratic Party is run by massive donors. And I'm hoping that he doesn't concede to the pressure that happens every time there's some progressive that runs for the Democratic Party. You start to see them little by little give way into it. And that's I'm very nervous about that. So if he sticks to his promises, then great. But again, we've seen this so many times. Did Obama talk a great game in the build-up to the 2008 election? Yeah, and then he just capitulated on everything and ended up where we are today. So I think that's a great question, and it's something that you got to be hyper-vigilant about. I think the worst thing you can possibly do is for any politician to throw your blind faith behind them like they're going to save you. You cannot do that. You need to critically view each one of these candidates and hold them accountable. They're supposed to be accountable to us. We're not supposed to be accountable to them. So that's what I would argue.
He'll vote Bernie Sanders elected.
Bernie, yeah, Bernie's been very disappointing to me as well. I used to love Bernie, and now I've not really seen him follow through on some of his campaign promises or the things that he, popularized as well. Last thing here is this. This is my argument. I don't know if people are familiar with the ratchet effect, but this is what has happened since really like Bill Clinton's time period all the way up until today. Okay, so take a second. What is the ratchet effect? What is happening little by little inside of this country? We just keep doing what with the political window? More to the right, okay? Because every single time that this happens, no course correction has been done by any left-wing party, and certainly not the Democratic Party, that keep giving in to right-wing policies. Like even Obamacare, where did it come from? I just showed you that. Where did that idea originate? The Heritage Foundation, okay, Mitt Romney. So we keep moving further and further to the right with no course correction whatsoever. And that's why when you look at the political spectrum, I know I showed you this at the very beginning of this series. Where are Democrats and Republicans when you actually look at a globalized view of the political spectrum? Where are they? They're center-right parties, ultimately. Obviously, the Republicans a little bit more further to the right, but the Democrats are not that far behind. And the thing that links both of them, I can make it as simple as possible for you. What is the common denominator? What are they at the end of the day? They are capitalists, okay? And they will always protect their class interests at the end. Okay, so that's something that I just want you to keep in mind, because when you look at a political compass, for instance, there's not a huge difference when it comes to policy. Yes, Trump and Obama and Biden, they have differences with their personality and some slight differences with social policy, which you can certainly focus on. But when you get down to the nuts and bolts, when you get down to base economic policy and what impacts people's material conditions, they're pretty similar. Okay, they are capitalists at the end of the day, and that's what ultimately dictates most of their policies. So what I have for you in the back of your sheet, if you want to take a look at this at some point, but I kind of did a nice summation of the differences between various aspects of the political spectrum. So I have a nice little breakdown of how liberals view big picture issues, how conservatives view big picture issues, and then how do actual communists and socialists view big picture political issues, and how do fascists view big picture political issues. And I have a couple of questions, if you're interested at all, to kind of show those similarities and differences between these two groups to help you get a better understanding of what these terms actually mean and to be able to recognize them inside of various politicians so you're not as duped as I was, back in 2008 between these two groups. So, last thing that I'll close with, and then if you would like to stick around, I would love to hear your thoughts on some of the questions that I have in the packet in particular. But can you just take a minute and can you answer that closing prompt, which was at the beginning? Was Malcolm X correct? Okay, take a second, think about it, and try to give me like a solid reason for why or why not. Was Malcolm X, that original quote that I showed you, was he right? Would anybody like to verbalize that? Yeah, go ahead. My wife?
Me?
Yeah.
So, yes, but when you see the wolf, like Trump's term currently, you see everything that he's doing in real time.
And it's horrific.
And it's horrific, and you can respond to it. Whereas with a fox, everything is not covered by the media, or things go under the radar, so you don't know until after the fact what happens.
That's a great argument. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think so.
Mhm.
Obviously, both are dangerous. Again, to bring up Trump's second term, we knew what it was going into it, and
Yep.
everyone still voted for it. I'm not saying Harris wouldn't. Harris probably would have done still half the stuff Trump's doing. Maybe some of the worst stuff would have been a bit more covered up, but at the end of the day, the wolf is much worse and gruesome.
It's an interesting take, yeah. Yeah.
I don't have much to add. I agree with this statement, but I think a good example of how this happened is we talked about what happened with the Black Lives Matter and how Obama, kind of negotiated his way out of having more radical roots of those protests. And to this day, Obama's hailed as this great speaker. He gives lessons on speaking, and the best that those speaking skills did were contribute to kind of pushing the window to the right even further. So it just goes to show how even those positive qualities are used to serve the same agenda.
Yeah, I think that's kind of my main argument. But yeah, go ahead.
Also, there's something to be said about politicians like Obama who people get behind and feel hopeful about, and then disengage with politics completely, or disengage with societal change in any way, shape, or form. And I think that's very harmful.
Yeah, and a lot of people, myself included, were disillusioned by the entire system. Yeah. Yep.
Again, we're only given two options.
Right.
Fox or Wolf or Democrats or Republicans.
Yeah, they're both going to get you at the end, just in different ways. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, doesn't it speak to how much of his presidency was about optics, and how, I think today he owns a movie.
Oh, yes, production studio.
Yeah, exactly. There was never any effectual change, right? It was all about optics and presenting the right image.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think Sharon, go ahead.
I think what Obama did really well is that he wore the costume of the oppressed.
Is there any Ta-Nehisi Coates book that you recommend in particular?
The Message is the one that I read.
That's a great recommendation.
He was using it in reference to Palestine.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I guess just kind of my final argument on this is I think we need to broaden our perspective and our horizons on what we expect out of political parties. I think we need to expect more out of politicians, we need to expect more out of political parties, and we need to break through the duopoly because either way, it seems we, working class, ends up losing at the end of the day. So, yeah, I would.
The quote just reminds me of the beginning of Letter from Birmingham Jail by
Yes.
MLK, where he's talking about like more than he's scared of Ku Klux Klan members, he's like the white moderate is like scarier to him because they're like just like patting you on the back and good job.
Yeah, he says they're more devoted to order than justice. Yes, and that's, right from Letter from a Birmingham Jail. Yeah, one more.
I wonder if the wolf was a black woman, what the difference would be. Like Shirley Chisholm, somebody like that, someone who has a really strong personality. A couple of things. I remember one of the complaints about Obama was, before he started running, or when he started running, was that he didn't have any experience.
Right.
But he was also, he stepped on a lot of toes. A lot of black women who were organizing in Chicago, he was stepping on their toes. He was not being fair, and he didn't promote women really.
Right.
Apart from his wife, maybe. But to give him credit, when I was teaching at Utica College, I had a lot of black students, and their confidence level shot up when Obama was elected. And if that's the only thing he accomplished, it's a really
It's something, yes, and I think, you have to highlight that stuff as well, which I think is an excellent point. All right, final thing from me. I'll skip ahead real quick, and I really appreciate everybody sticking around. But last thing is this. Sorry, I don't always say that, but if you are interested at all, donations up here for the other side, and you can also talk to the PSL in the back. But just don't forget, Tuesday, September 23rd, I'll be back here to kind of go in chronological order when it comes to U.S. history. So I will cover big picture things like the American Revolution from a working class perspective. I will cover the U.S. Civil War and the Reconstruction era, which I think is one of the most pivotal time periods in our country's history, and focus on one guy in particular named John Brown, who you should be familiar with. Yeah. And then just kind of go through, the key events throughout our history right back until today. So I'll kind of connect it back to the things I've covered the past couple weeks. Also, don't forget, I will be at Superficial, or the Copper Easel in Rome on Tuesday, September 16th, with a presentation that might be on labor history, TBD, figure it out, but it's going to be something good. I know that. And they have there's a great organization there, and just a great space that I'm very excited to give a presentation there as well. So don't forget, you can stay connected on social media and all the different platforms to follow along with me. If anybody would like to stick around and continue to discuss some of the questions, I know it's getting late, I know it's already 8 o'clock, and we always end up going over time, but finally, I just want to say, thank you so much to the other side, to the PSL for co-sponsoring this. These past couple weeks have been some of the most heartening time periods that I've seen in this country. Just the turnout has been phenomenal. People taking interest in this stuff. Your comments to me when you just come up and talk to me afterwards has just been really nice to hear. So I cannot thank you enough for actually showing up week after week, and I hope you found something valuable in this, and that's why I want to continue it as much as I possibly can. Thanks a lot. Again, donations up here, and we'll catch up with you soon. But if you want to stick around and ask any questions, we can take a break for a minute, and then if you want to, we'll be here. And donation jar. Donation jars up here. Yes.